All right. I'd like to welcome everyone to the fourth webinar on software bill of materials that has been targeted at the energy and bulk power community. We've had a fun time over the last few months getting to know each other and getting to know SBOM. And so really the chance today is to dive into the substance. And so before we dive into the agenda today, I do want to quickly walk you through our journey thus far. So starting in January, we had the first webinar on, hey, what is this software bill of materials idea anyway? And we talked through some of the basics. The second meeting that we had was a bit of a technical deep dive into the underlying mechanics. What's the specification? What are some of the existing data formats that we have? And last month, we talked about how and why other people are doing this, right? This isn't something that is unique to the energy sector. In fact, quite the opposite. This is something that the entire software world is coming to terms with. And so we heard from voices in healthcare and automotive and software, as well as from our friends at the national labs to say, why is this important? And why is it important that we experiment with it, that we don't just talk about it? And today, we're going to dive into what a proof of concept could look like. This has been what we've been building up to as we've done this education and outreach approach. So exploring an SBOM proof of concept for the energy community, we're going to start with Cherry Caddy, who's the senior advisor for the CSER program in the Department of Energy. We're going to review what a proof of concept model has looked like in the past and what it could look like in this perspective, in this context. And then we're going to walk through the supply chain with a few key voices. I think some of these names will be familiar, where we sort of go down the supply chain and talk about our perspectives and the strengths and the potential concerns for what an SBOM proof of concept could be. And I've asked each of these participants to sort of say just a few minutes of what they're thinking. And then really what we're going to be is turning the floor over to you. Have a chance of what you would like in a proof of concept perspective. We know there are going to be a bunch of different perspectives, and we want to lay the groundwork for what this could look like. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll talk about what the next steps are going to be. But before we dive in, I'll turn over the floor to Cherry Caddy, who, in addition to being a senior advisor for CSER, is one of the driving forces at Energy Headquarters behind the Citrix program, and someone who's thought a lot about the challenges of cybersecurity in the energy sector. Cherry?
Thanks so much, Alan, and thanks again for NTIA's partnership in this regard. I know you and I have been working on supply chain issues for a long time, and your foundational work in driving SBOM is really critical. And it does seem like we're building towards an idea whose time has really come. Supply chain issues are not getting any better. We've seen the best advertising by far from the adversary of exploiting supply chain type vulnerabilities, and we know we need to do we need to find a better way to get after this, and coming up with the digital ingredients and developing a repeatable process to make this a viable means of exchanging information to illuminate supply chain risk and therefore better manage it is critical. I think we're going to see more policy action coming from the White House in this regard. I've definitely seen some open source reporting that the bill of materials concept definitely has legs at the highest levels of the policy circle. So I think we are at the point for this group of really being at the head of the curve and thinking through, how do you really make this work? It's one thing to say national policy is going to support using SBOMs to illuminate and manage supply chain risk for digital components, but how do you make that work? And that's really what we're here today to talk about. And I'm really delighted to be able to put sponsorship of the Department of Energy behind this in the form of getting the labs to participate and sponsoring and funding their participation in really helping think through for the energy sector, how can we make this work? As folks, of course, here have noticed, we do have the bulk power executive order that's still out there and will be refreshed later in this month after the 90-day pause that happened at the beginning of the administration. So we have very specific interests and equities at the Department of Energy and the energy sector for getting this right. And Alan, as you alluded to, I am the manager for the Citrix program, is a cyber vulnerability testing and enumeration program for the Department of Energy to look at the supply chain for operational technology components and industrial control systems. So this is really a high priority area of activity for the Department of Energy. So we're super pleased to have NTIA's partnership and assistance in helping us unwind this really important problem. So look forward to the discussion today. It's great that we're focused on the energy sector. I'm happy to sponsor this and sponsor the lab's participation, and look forward to getting together the coalition of the willing to help us with this journey. So with that said, back over to you for the rest of the program, Alan.
Thank you, Jerry. And we're really happy to have the partnership with Energy because, of course, while NTIA has worked on herding the cats for the broader software community, this is something that we've acknowledged from the beginning requires a mapping of the entire software world so that we're all moving in the same direction, but still sector-specific knowledge, right? Every corner of the world has their own unique demands. We need to make sure that we're compatible, but still flexible. That's one of the joys of this process. One of my recent mantras has been, the easy problems have been solved already. And that's one of the things that makes this a real challenge. So you talked about the coalition of the willing, and we're really happy to see so many folks that have joined today. Let's talk a little bit about what this could look like. And the one thing I want to underscore is this really is up to you as a broader community to find out what meets the needs that you want moving forward. And there are going to be some challenges. I will share the model that has worked in a couple of other different communities, but that's the starting point. There are going to be different perspectives. Probably not everyone is going to be wildly happy. That's the joy and the nature of these multi-stakeholder processes. But we think we can find something that, one, meets the needs of folks, and two, also allows us to move forward in a quick and agile fashion. Because one thing I will acknowledge is that if we move slowly, the danger is decisions will be made for us. And what we really want to do is empower the community to say, take leadership so that you can decide what works for you. So let's do the awkward 10 seconds of sharing the slide screen again while I look for my slide deck here. And now we have, so let's talk about what this could look like. This is the very basic model of what a proof of concept could look like. And the goal here is to say Sbombs are created by a producer of Sbombs, and then they are consumed. And the reason we start with this two-part model is because the goal isn't just to have the data. And don't get me wrong, there's huge value to the data for producers of software. But a lot of the huge value is to understand this in the supply chain because it's a supply chain issue. And so that's been a foundational part of how we think about this exercise is let's build the supply chain consideration into it. And so we start off with saying producer to consumer with mutual consent. And then we say, but it's not just about the people who are producing Sbombs and share it with the consumer. Yes, we want to make sure that the entire community has a say in how to explore how to generate Sbombs. By the community, we mean the software folks, as well as right, anyone in the energy world can say, hey, let's talk about what we need. And we want to define the use cases for consumption. Right? We're not going to solve all of these problems. We're not going to jump to a run approach off the bat. We may want to follow a model of, to repeat another NTIA mantra, crawl, walk, run. But this is a chance for the entire community to weigh in and say, what are the use cases that we want to prioritize? What are the edge cases that we can say, let's hold off on that for now? Now, the Sbombs themselves, because if we could do this right, we can do this on live data. We want to make sure, hey, people who are engaged in this, maybe they don't want to air everything immediately. And so this is a key innovation that the healthcare community started, was they said, hey, we're going to use a data protection model. In their case, they used an NDA to say the data itself will only go from the producer to the consumer. That part's protected legally. as well as so folks can feel comfortable. But again, the entire community, everyone on this call, while you don't get to touch the data itself, can still say, hey, let's talk about what the fields are. Let's evaluate the challenges. Let's talk about what the use cases are. And by the way, all of those producers and consumers share out their findings at a regular basis, right? In the healthcare world, they have weekly working group calls where they say, here's a challenge that we found. And they won't say explicitly, this product has this challenge, but they'll say, we had this, how do we think about this aspect? And so everyone is able to weigh in on defining this. So even if you're not an immediate part of generating or consuming SBOMs, you'll be able to do this. Now, right now we're talking about producers and consumers, but we all know it's a big ecosystem. And one of the things that we also want to think about is incorporating third-party help in sometimes generating the SBOMs. NTIA had our first Plug Fest on Friday, where companies that are actively involved in making SBOMs were able to sort of show what they could generate off of a sample set of software. And of course, how's the data going to be used? Integrating it into security tools and into data management tools, because we know that the people who are going to be using SBOMs, maybe they'll be doing it in-house, but maybe they don't want to write their own software. Maybe they want to partner with some of their existing vendors. And so this model of partnering with vendors is going to be key. One of the things we'll need to think about as a community is how do we manage that? One thing that has been very impressive in the healthcare sector is everyone has understood this is not a biz dev opportunity. We're all trying to solve a problem. Security vendors know that if we solve it well, it will grow the marketplace. And so everyone has worked hard to not denigrate their competitors' products or to say that their model is the best way. Instead, we just talk about what's best for the ecosystem. Now, when I talk about producer and consumer, what do we mean? Well, perhaps the easiest model to map from how other sectors have done to this is to say, let's start with the manufacturer and let's move to the asset owner, right? This is who makes the stuff that has software in it, and then who's operating the stuff. And so, for example, in the healthcare world, this is the medical device manufacturer and the hospital. But there are other options we could consider that I want to just put on the table. So I don't want to lock you into one way of thinking about it. So for example, this could be a mapping between manufacturer and the integrator. We know that's a very natural part of the energy sector. Or it could be if we don't have any asset owners that are ready to jump in at this stage, we could start thinking about other security organizations, such as risk assessment organizations, or such as data analytics or vulnerability analytics organizations. So they can just say, hey, let me see if I can process this data. And then in turn, we'll prepare to work with asset owners. Or then finally, right, it's a big supply chain. And so we could also think about this as upstream suppliers sharing data with manufacturers. And that's another option that we'll actually touch on in today's discussions. Could be a combination of these. There are many options. I think there's value in starting simple and slowly growing, but also being prepared to move quickly in an agile fashion. That's the tension. This is volunteer-run initiative with help and support from folks like the national labs, the Department of Energy. But I think we're going to have to consider what's feasible as well as how we can sort of ramp up and move fast. So that's some of the things to start thinking about. And from there, we have a very illustrious panel to sort of talk about how they've been thinking about this. Everyone on this panel is familiar with the idea of SBOMs and has been thinking about this. So let's dive in. We'll start with Brian Owen from OSIsoft. We can think of as one of the people pretty far up in the headwaters of the supply chain. And he can share how he and his organization have been thinking about this.
Hey, thank you, Alan. Wonderful introduction to the SBOM concept. And I want to pause and just acknowledge all the great work that NTIA has done to get us to this point in time. It's really appreciated. This mantra of component transparency, software component transparency is something I truly believe in. And part of that goes back to when we look at where we are, I think just look back a decade, how far we've come is impressive in terms of making more secure software. There's been the folks from Gary McGraw, and I saw Steve Lipner recently join the call in Microsoft's SDL. So much has been done to mature our processes, but in some ways, we're not yet mature. It wasn't just a month or so ago, we had a big fire drill to go look for JetBrains in our build chains, right? There was an article in New York Times, and all of a sudden you're doing this giant search. So what we find with SBOMs is so attractive is that we'll have facts and data to base our decision making on. And it's scalable. It's an infrastructure that I think everyone in the energy sector can appreciate, that this will mature the entire ecosystem. So we've been taking advantage of that, and we've found suppliers that can generate SBOMs for us. It's very exciting for us to be able to share those to customers that are ready for it. Or a place I'm really excited is you had the risk assessment folks on there, and we're super excited to share with the Department of Energy Labs and the Citrix program. We think that could be one of the best use cases coming up next. So that's kind of how I want to close it out. If you'll allow me a brief moment of comedy, I've wanted to be the first to use a parrot head phrase in a SBOM talk. So this comes from Jimmy Buffett's Fruitcakes album. It's relationships are like supply chain, right? So he's got a line in there that says, "Hey, relationships, we all have them, we all want them. What are we going to do with them?" So back to you, Alan.
We'll have to add to that. Some of you know that we've been collecting examples of SBOM karaoke to modify lyrics, because when you're working with a small idea on a small budget, you got to do anything to get the word out. So I love that idea. Thank you. So let's take a little step down now to a very small company that's based in really a very picturesque village in France. And hear from Cassie Crossley, who is on the product security team at Schneider Electric. Cassie, how have you been thinking about SBOM, and do you have any thoughts about what a proof of concept could look like?
Yeah, I want to reiterate what Brian was saying. Is thank you so much for bringing this together. We're very eager to get moving forward with this proof of concept with the energy community. So we are like he said, small, 140,000 employee, global 26 billion euro company, everywhere and in everything, in my opinion. We are our initial partner in the Citrix program. So we're very excited that we've been in that. And from an SBOM perspective, I've been participating in the awareness adoption group because as a company ourselves, we have been working on the SBOM topic for now a couple years internally. How do we really move forward with being able to use it in our vulnerability management practices, but also for our customers, because we're both a consumer and a producer of SBOMs, which means we need to understand the SBOMs coming in and what can we provide to our customers. So let's talk about what our motivations are in Schneider Electric, is really taking it a step further, is how do we operationalize the whole SBOM topic. The production itself is, let's just say, a tool or an aspect of it, but how do we bring the inputs in and then export that and bring it out to our customer base or integrators or risk management? It is not a small concept when you have thousands of products with multiple release and multiple versions, many of which have been out there for over a decade or more. I mean, we've got long sustaining products. So we are working to figure out how do we build the team that can support all of those different layers from a technology standpoint, but how do we interact with each other to give that information? I mean, when you're talking about SBOMs, especially for highly sensitive topics, things with encrypted binaries, it's more than what the healthcare POC had done just from a legal, is what are the physical controls we should consider, not just the legal controls. That's important to us. So we're very excited to participate in this and move as quickly as we can.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Cassie. And yeah, I think you've highlighted something that's important, which is each community is going to build on the work that's already happened. The benefit here is we won't need to invent this from scratch. When the healthcare community started this 2 years ago, we didn't know what an SBOM should look like. Today, I would put it to you that we know the basics of what an SBOM should be. We have the data formats that can happen. And so now we can explore areas that the community hasn't precisely addressed, such as, hey, how does my SBOM get from one place to another? And what kind of controls do we want on it? There are some tools out there in the world today. And again, I think it's unlikely that we're going to see a one-size-fits-all solution, but we can use this as a chance to say what's scalable, what works, what are the requirements, and things like that. Thank you. So now we're going to dive into going from the supply side to the consumer side, and we'll start with Val from Natf. I've got one slide that I'm going to throw up here for you, since you sent it along, and it would be incredibly irresponsible if I didn't have it ready. And so, yes, Val, why don't you tell us a little bit about how Natf thinks about things?
Thanks, Alan. And again, I've got to reiterate what excuse me, what everybody else has said about the good work and how we appreciate being a part of it. Oh, excuse me. First of all, Natf started out kind of diving into the supply chain world and working with just our members, and we quickly came to the conclusion, just like what you're trying to do with bringing a community together, is that it was much bigger, and we needed to involve everybody. So we organized the industry organizations team, which is comprised of suppliers and a group that we're calling solution providers, as well as trade organizations and anybody who participated in this endeavor. So what you see in front of you is the supplier assessment model process overview. So the group came up with a basic 5-step process, which is collecting information, evaluating that. We tend to, again, as Alan has said, be very inclusive for how can we address risks and identify them and mitigate them. Then having people conduct their risk assessment as well as their general overall purchase decision assessment, make their purchase decision. This is where you would include the legal terms to back up any mitigations. And then, of course, implement the controls and monitor the risks. So with the collect information piece of it, this is where you collect information from suppliers and validate it. And this is where I think that the SBOM comes in. The Natf and the IO team have developed a questionnaire and criteria for people to gather information, but we also really encourage people to use other partners and external information. The more people can get and the more people can efficiently put into their risk assessments, I think the more informed people will be. So that's really where we're hoping to bring in the SBOM and to include it in the process, is to be able to take all of the data and the information and include it in a usable format to put it into entities' risk assessment so they can get their arms around the risk and do some mitigations. And Alan, that's about all I had, and I know that we'll have conversation a little bit later.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I like that approach. And just again, to help underscore the notion that we're all in a similar situation. This is somewhat similar to the healthcare world, where they've said, let's think about medical device security scores. They've developed a common form. They said, hey, part of this process should be SBOM data. And so SBOM is part of this complete breakfast. It's not going to solve all of our problems, but if we do it well, it will fit into these other solutions that folks are developing. So we're trying to avoid reinventing anything, but really helping this dock in. And we know that there are a bunch of different efforts. So let's talk about how it can slot in. And Stephanie, I know that you spent a lot of time thinking about supply chain side of things. This is Stephanie Toussaint from the Edison Electric Institute.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Alan, and the SBOM working group teams for all the great work that you've done and put towards these information sessions, presentations, and discussions. My name is Stephanie Toussaint. I am the manager of cyber and infrastructure security at Edison Electric Institute, and we think that the proof of concept is a great idea and will prove to be very valuable moving forward. Let me put this into the chat, just so that you have a reference point. I wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of EEI's model procurement contract language addressing cybersecurity supply chain risk document. This document was released in May 2020, and it reflects the evolving industry standard practices and the changes with these specific industry standards, and it speaks to the time-specific requirements. This model procurement contract language document is a helpful resource for everyone to use as a tool to facilitate managing and mitigating cybersecurity supply chain risk. And it aligns with the cybersecurity requirements and encourages adoption by the vendor community. This document provides a consistent set of provisions that address the CIP 13 security controls within your respective contract forms and is helpful in the development for requests for information or proposals. Just please take a moment to check out the link, and we invite everyone to review it and use it as a helpful resource to mitigate and manage supply chain risk. Thank you all, and thank you for your time. I look forward to this journey.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, that's a great resource and is one of these things that is sort of helping push the community in this direction, and also giving the community a certain set of incentives to say, hey, if we want these things, what exactly do we mean? How do we operationalize it? As a number of you have suggested already. And so now we sort of move down to the last point of the supply chain, one of the key operators. So we'll turn to Tony Edelman, who's with the Nebraska Public Power District and is also the chairman of the NERC Supply Chain Working Group, to share sort of some of his thoughts on both SBOM and what a proof of concept exercise could look like.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Can you confirm you can hear me?
Yep.
Good to go. All right. I support the development of SBOMs. From a utilities perspective, we need to know what we're buying and the component that makes up a software package. As we operate control systems to keep the lights on, our jobs have become much more complex. When I first started working for a utility over a couple of decades ago, and prior to mandatory regulations, and I emphasize prior to mandatory regulations, if we wanted to take a transmission line out of service for maintenance and we didn't know if the other lines could handle the flow, we just opened the transmission line to see how the flows on the system would change. We wouldn't dream of doing this today. Our computer systems back then were slow and couldn't handle the multiple complex calculations needed to solve robust power flows. By contrast, today's computer systems can solve very complex problems very quickly and allow us to manage the ever-increasingly complex power grid. We can use programs such as contingency analysis to take real-time conditions of the power grid and throw hundreds of contingencies, which may be the loss of a transmission line or lines, power plants, etc., and determine if we can withstand loss of critical components on our system, and run these hundreds of simulations with real-time values every 5 minutes. Computers can do amazing things for us today, but as we depend on computers more and more to keep the lights on, we are held captive to these programs working at a very high availability, being online 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We can't afford any downtime at all. As we think about complex computers to operate the grid, think about how easy it can be for an adversary to hack a system or infiltrate the supply chain, as we witnessed late last year with SolarWinds. A coordinated attack can have more far-reaching and life-threatening effects than the recent cold weather event that in February caused many outages when our customers needed us most. Safe, reliable electricity is needed to heat our homes in winter, run the water pumps to supply water to our homes, power nursing homes, hospitals, jails, and other critical facilities. So, why do we need SBOMs? We need to know the components included within our software packages. Like I said that to begin with. We receive multiple messages daily from our Electricity Information Sharing and Analysis Center, we call them EISAC, on new threats and vulnerabilities. How can we assess the new emerging risks daily if we don't know exactly what software components we have running on our systems? It could be that one, and I quote, added on utility that our system doesn't use, but somehow an adversary found a backdoor into our system through that, I quote again, added on utility, and creates havoc for us. We must know what we have installed to operate the grid. Just a few years ago, we saw the Ukraine power system get hacked and the attacker opened breakers and put customers in the dark. So we know it can happen. We have new regulatory requirements for supply chain risk management. We must determine the risk of procuring software, hardware, and services for our critical component systems. Through the Natf, we have developed criteria and a questionnaire to use when evaluating the risk of our vendors. Our next step forward in this journey to reduce supply chain risk is to develop SBOMs. We need to start small. We need to build on our development and understand we are on a journey. Thank you.
I like that. Thank you. The framing of "we're on a journey" is a wonderful way to kick off our conversation, because now is when we get to take our first step as a community. Up till now, the last few months, we've all had the conversation where it's all been broadcast. Here's knowledge from people to you, the broad community. Now it's your time to do the work, to take that first step. So what we're going to do is try to have the chaos of saying, what do you think this could look like? So we have different perspectives, and we sort of walked through some of the different players, but we'd like to hear from you about what a proof of concept could look like. This is the brainstorming session, so we're not committing to anything today, but this is a chance to get ideas into the community and help people realize what other people are thinking and where they're coming from. If you have concerns, now's the time to raise those. But it's also a chance for you to say, hey, this is one opportunity that I think we should do, or here's one of the easier paths forward. So one thing you can do is you can raise your hand in the Teams app, and we will try to bring various perspectives to the table. Once a hand is raised, I'll call on them, and Catherine will make sure that we can hear you. I see that Jeffrey Sweet's hand is up. So can we go to Jeff?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can. Thanks so much.
Good. So thank you for doing what you're doing and trying to get this put together, because I think this is going to be vitally important. As Tony said a few moments ago, this is a journey that we're going to have to go down. It's not going to be something that's going to be easy. I've talked to vendors, and they're concerned about the amount of effort that it's going to take to build these. And I think as we go down this pathway, we need to look at how we can standardize this process and make it easy for the vendors to be able to supply that data, as well as you mentioned early on in the presentation, how we can secure that data from the point that the vendor is placing it to the point that the consumer is receiving it. Additionally, I think we need to get some sort of a standardized format for the consumption of that data for the consumers. So something like a STIX or a taxi type format that we use for intelligence today. By doing that, then everybody can utilize the same type of system to consume that data and be able to evaluate it, and it'll be much easier to determine what the components are and be able to use the data to be able to inform their decisions as far as purchase is concerned, or as far as implementation mitigations are concerned.
Great point, Jeff. Thank you. And yes, the challenge of thinking about this in sort of standardizing the key. We do have data formats today that the community has gravitated towards for the standardization. But what's the taxi model look like? Do we need to think about transport, or can we rely on tools to say, it's JSON, it's XML, we can blend them together and make use of them? And I think there are strengths and weaknesses in each perspective. Whether the community wants to say this is the one true way, or we're going to try to accommodate the diversity that exists in the marketplace today. We have Dick Brooks' hand up.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for everything you've done. You really made this a success. You've been pushing this forward for a long time, and its time has come. So I just want to say that the energy industry has been a leader, really, in trying to address these supply chain issues, going back to FERC Order 850. And I look forward to participating in the energy proof of concept on the consumer side to provide some software supply chain risk assessment outcomes. Thanks very much. You're muted, Alan.
It helps when yes, I can't thank you when I'm muted. Thank you. No, we really appreciate it. And it is heartening to hear so many people interested in this at different points of the supply chain. Are there further thoughts about what you'd like to see this look like? You can raise your hand. If you're on the phone, I believe you can press *6. See, we have a few folks on the phone. Should also add that while we're very happy to have engagement from the Department of Energy and from the US National Labs, this is clearly an international issue. We have international companies involved. I see that there are folks on the call now, not just from Europe, but some of our friends in Japan, where it is very late. So that, I think, gives you a signal of how the world is going to be looking to you, really, for some of your leadership. So now's your chance to chime in. This is where we have DL we chime in. So you may have to introduce yourself, since I can't introduce you by name.
Yeah, sorry about that, Alan. Hi, I'm David Lawrence. I'm with Duke Energy, and I grew up with ABB as a manufacturer. And what you learn in product development is that, the hardware is kind of king. Bill of material is definitely a king. If you're trying to share designs around the world, every item in a bill of material basically has a pointer to a drawing or a collection of drawings. So my question would be, if I'm going to do, and eventually at the end of the product, the software ends up having one number, kind of. So if you end up with a fairly complex program, like let's just say something simple, like a protection relay, or something simple like a meter, how many parts do you think we'll have in it? How big will the subassembly be? And the rule on parts, if you have form, fit, function, and any one of those three changes, then you either get a revision or you get a new part. This is sort of the hardware world. So taking that to the software world, have you guys worked out, or has the community worked out what this is going to look like? And how often will you be changing form, fit, function? If you flip one bit in the software, does that mean a new part number? And will you end up with like gazillions of part numbers? And so I'd like to hear a little bit on the thinking around this. So thank you.
That's a really fun question. I'm happy for folks to chime in on the chat, and we can expand into this because what we're doing is we're starting to dive into some of the real practical questions. Again, I'll return to the notion that the easy problems have been solved. And on one hand, the way the broader software community has thought about this is they start off with a fairly simple view of the world, which is to say, hey, if you have a piece of software, you need to have a way of referencing that piece of software, right? Now, that gets challenging when you have non-monolithic updates, right? So, and this is true in enterprise tech as well, right? I've got a big database program that's just blobs on a platter, but I have 7 patches that are available. I only apply 3 of them because those are the 3 that work for me. Now I have a challenge as a customer of how do I communicate upstream with my supplier about which version I have, and they know which version I have. Not an easy problem, not something that's unique to SBOM, but is something we're going to need to get our hands around if we want to solve any of these security problems. More broadly, the question of software identity is at the foundation of SBOM, right? I am using this cryptographic library. How do you know which cryptographic library I'm talking about? How do we have that shared confidence? That's something that the community has also started to think about. The general approach so far has been there are existing solutions to all these problems. It's not that we don't have any standards, it's that we have too many standards. And so what we will need to do is say, what are the areas where we're actively going to accommodate multiple solutions? And what are the areas where we as a community are going to say, you know what, for our world, this is how we're going to solve it. It's possible we may need to invent brand new things, but I think in this case, when possible, I encourage you to, as much as possible, live off the land, if for no other reason that we need to be, we need to collaborate and make sure that our solutions are interoperable with the broader world, because after all, you all use other types of software in your organizations, and many of the upstream components are not just used in the energy world, they're used in a lot of other areas. So I saw that we've got a couple of responses there. Let me pull up the chat as folks have been thinking about this. The Tom Burdick wants to dive into exactly how we're mapping the hashes, and that's a great question. I'm going to say we'll hold off on diving into the exact technical implementation for just a little bit, but we're going to capture this so that we can make sure that these are things that we think about as we plan this. If you don't mind me being a slightly dictatorial moderator, what I'd like to do is zoom up just a little bit away from the pure implementation and more from the structure of the exercise and how you envision this working. Do we want to focus on generation? Do we want to try to focus on generation and consumption? Are people willing to stand up and say, yes, my organization is excited about participating in this? See if anyone new wants to raise their hand and chime in about what this could look like. All right,
Someone has their
hear
hand raised,
from Dick.
Alan. Okay.
Yeah, let's hear from Dick.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, there's been a lot of good work the energy industry has done with regard to SBOM. Stephanie sent out the procurement model where they actually went ahead and identified SBOM as a key requirement. And NATF has a fantastic questionnaire that they've been sending out to vendors. And my suggestion is this, look, in the proof of concept, if we could leverage what the EEI folks and the NATF folks have done in demonstrating that their good advice is also valuable and can be used as part of the proof of concept, I think that would go a long way to showing the viability of the solution. So let's leverage those two sources of information and put those into the POC. Thanks.
Thank you. No, I love that. And we want to make sure not just to leverage those sources of information, but the expertise that built them. So thank you for that. Tom, did you have something that you wanted to chime in on?
No, I was just pointing out that there was a hand raised, but
thanks.
I guess that was Dick. Okay.
So this is the part of these events where I start to feel a little bit like the late night AM DJ. If there are any requests out there, this is your chance to chime in. Otherwise, we can go into the next steps, but I did want to see, I know this is a large audience, and we're going to slowly over time probably narrow it down to some folks that are ready to roll up their sleeves and start. But the important thing is that work happens in a public and transparent fashion, so that folks who say, you know what, I'm not ready myself to join, or my organization doesn't have the resources to join yet, but I want to be involved. I want to at least watch and be able to chime in. And that's going to be critical to what our process looks like moving forward. There's a question from Tom about the legal side. And that's a fun question. Some of you were at S4 last year, where we had a conversation where we just imagined a world where SBOMs existed and talked about some of the operational challenges. I think you're right that this will change things a little bit. I think based on some of the lawyers and experts that I've talked about, it's easy to overstate some of the concerns, right? It's very easy to sort of blame the lawyers to not do things. But I think once our community starts to realize that we need this benefit, we need these benefits, we'll find a way to make sure this can happen. And for example, Cassie's remarks, she talked about the importance of making sure that the data is shared, but in a protected way, right? We're maybe not ready to make everything completely public. And so we can talk about what that could look like. So I'll do one last glance around the virtual room to see if anyone else wants to raise their hand. If you're on the phone and have some thoughts, it's *6. It has been nice to hear some interest on this, but it'd be great to get some conversations. Dimitri. So I thought we had a hand raised. If that was just a mistake, that's okay too. There we go. Let me see if Dimitri, you can unmute yourself now.
Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, so one of the things I want to add, and something interesting that I had discussion over the weekend, is SBOM training, like some formal SBOM training, or even SBOM certification, or even like we got into this discussion with this person into having like SBOM chapters in different countries and different continents to promote the concept. Like as example, you know, ICS squared or something like that. And is there any intentions or thoughts about that?
I love that idea. And if the community wants it, I think it's great. The advice I would offer is, and some of you, I don't know if anyone here comes from a bit of a red team background or a hacking background, but there's a phrase when you're trying to do a pen test of living off the land, of saying, let me sort of use what tools exist in the environment. And similarly, I'd encourage you, if possible, to avoid inventing new things, but use what we already have. And so if this community has, because I know that there are many conferences and many associations, some of which are very broad and some of which are very targeted to specific interest groups, let's use those. So if you're a member of anything from a trade association to a membership association to a standards body, let's use what you have. And you know, Dimitri, if you have some thoughts on what this could look like, write it up and folks can share it and start talking about it. I love the idea of ways that we can get SBOM out there, but I also want to fall back to a very important consideration, which is we're all facing many real challenges in security. SBOM isn't the be all and end all. We just think it's going to enable a whole bunch of great things. Oh, sorry, and Cassie has flagged some playbooks that one of the working groups she's involved in is working today to say, hey, we're the broader NTI community. If you've missed this, there are some videos on the NTI website that sort of walk you through what are the existing pieces that we have in the SBOM world. So I'm going to do another scan around the room, and I'll also sort of set up sort of the slide that we have for next steps. Because really now we've got the hard work. And so we wanted to put something on your calendar. When is the planning meeting going to happen? So again, everything thus far has been sort of in a webinar structure where it's been about presenting. Starting moving forward, going to keep emphasizing this, the work happens from you. And the next meeting is going to be on Monday, April 26th. We're going to keep this time slot of 12 to 1, but we won't necessarily lock that into what the eventual working group that comes out of it will meet. If you're on my mailing list already, we will share that information about it. If you somehow have made it thus far to have heard about SBOM but haven't gotten an email from me, my apologies, and send me an email to afreeman@ntia.gov. Also embarrassing that's not on this slide is ntia.gov/SBOM is where all of your SBOM goodness is. And in fact, the community is going to be publishing an SBOM at a glance document that will sort of help with this very briefly. I did see there was one hand up very quickly. If anyone wanted to chime in before I make one last announcement. So Stephen, do you want to share some thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. And again, thanks everybody around this bringing this value to the community. I do have a question when we take a look at embedded system software, where I would say that 80% of the software is actually either home developed or built within inside the organization, and 20% relies on libraries, VxWorks, operating system, and so forth. How do we handle those parts of the software that really don't have the outside company and authenticity and the tracking of the software that's being home developed?
That's a super fun question, and I would point you to the myriad of other efforts that are focused on software assurance, not least of which is the Citrix program, in part of the U.S. Department of Energy. But I know that there are a number of other efforts that are saying exactly this. It's how do I secure the software that I wrote and make sure that it's good? SBOM really works hard to say, hey, we know that you can't be accountable for the software that you wrote, but we need to track it. In some ways, it's a slightly easier question. So that's my slight wiggle answer. And if anyone has some initial things to share with Stephen on the broader question of how do we make sure that the non-third party, the first party software is secure, then we can do that. All right. With that being said, let's talk about what's going to happen next. There's one last thing I want to do, which is to sort of talk about what the structure of work is going to be. And again, a lot of this is going to be determined by you, the community, as you show up. NTIA has adopted a model of being a little agile and making sure that we can accommodate things. And so we have working groups and sub-working groups as problems arise. And there's a certain amount of informality. We like to make jokes about karaoke on 100-person calls. But if that doesn't fit what you're looking for, that's okay. The structure will be determined. To help facilitate the first wave and this first community, we said, hey, NTIA is here to help and we will bring the SBOM expertise, but we should have some coordinators that actually come from the energy community. And so after talking with the Department of Energy, I have asked Ginger Wright from INL to be one of the co-chairs, and Tom Ulrich, who is I'm just going to refer to you as a blogger. He's been in the energy community for a while, has a deep background in a bunch of different areas, to be the two co-chairs. And they know that their role is to help facilitate and to do a lot of the work. So I'm really grateful that they've agreed to help with this. And as I said, the first meeting that they're going to be driving is going to be on April 26th, 12 to 1 Eastern. We'll have more information about that. We're going to have some mailing lists that we can start some of the active conversation and moving on from there. So with that, I thought I'd give the last word to either Ginger or Tom to have one more exhortation for folks to roll up their sleeves and help them. Otherwise, they're going to have an awful lot of work to do themselves.
I'm fine with going first. Thanks, Alan. I'm quite honored to be chosen to lead the energy POC with Ginger. I think the POC is a great opportunity for the industry to get out in front of the rest of the country and the whole world, for that matter, in addressing what I think is the biggest source of supply chain of cybersecurity risk in general worldwide, and that's the software supply chain. And of course, recent events have only emphasized that. It's impossible to address this problem, though, without having SBOMs. Even though SBOMs themselves don't solve any problems, they are the means by which problems are solved. And
thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. Well, I did want to point out that there will
Please.
be 2 levels of participation. One is the people who participate in the, actually sign the NDA and participate in producing, exchanging SBOMs. And then it's the more general group, which Alan referred to earlier. And if you're not sure about being in the first group, then that's fine. The second group is really where all the real decisions and discussion about these things and all the documents will be generated. And that's open to anybody. So, please at least try to join that second level, and then you can think about the first level at some point in the future.
Thank you. Key point.
Yes, thanks, Tom. I agree with what you've said. If you have SBOMs to contribute or ideas about creating SBOMs, that is welcome. If you have questions about what it means to create software bills of materials and some of the things that have arisen here, what kind of training could we produce? How do we recognize a well-formed SBOM, a complete SBOM? How do we transport these things? How do we ingest them and make meaning out of them? All of these are valid questions that even if we're not independently creating SBOMs, there's room to talk about these things and prepare some guidance for the energy sector. So today we've talked about some great resources to build on, and I'm excited to have those things to bring in. And I would invite anyone who wants to participate to join us later in April for that next meeting. Right now, our email address is going to go through Alan, and we will set up independent email addresses for this proof of concept as we mature just a little bit. So more to come, but if you have ideas for the proof of concept right now, if they can go back to Alan, he'll collect those for us as we set up some infrastructure.
Thank you, Ginger and Tom, for stepping forward. Thanks to all of our participants today in the discussion and helping to share these perspectives. There's plenty of work to be done. We're looking forward to doing it. We're looking forward to partnering with you, just as we've started to partner with the Department of Energy. But this is going to work because you, the experts in the energy community, are willing to sort of take these steps and start this journey. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time today. This concludes our webinar, but starts the real work.